The empath's darkest upgrade: cold, calm, unreachable, Jung insight. There's a specific kind of silence that used to terrify you, and now feels like oxygen. You're in a room where tension is building, a friend venting in circles, a co-worker testing the waters before an apology that never lands, and instead of stepping in to soften it, you just let it sit there. You watch it happen. You don't rush to fix the air. And somewhere in that stillness, you notice something has shifted in you so quietly that you can't even point to the day it started. You didn't decide to stop caring. You just stopped volunteering to carry what was never yours to carry in the first place. Something changed in you, and people noticed before you did. You no longer react the way you used to. No outrage, no emotional explanations, no quiet campaign to prove you're a good person. Just a calm that unsettles the people around you in a way they can't quite name. This is the moment an empath begins turning into something most people aren't equipped to handle. And once that shift starts, it doesn't run in reverse, because what you've started seeing in people cannot be unseen. You began noticing the manipulation tucked inside kindness, the quiet power plays hiding in ordinary conversations, the way people test your limits while insisting they care about you. You didn't get colder. You got aware, and awareness changes how other people experience you. People who used to feel safe around you start to feel exposed, not because you attacked them, but because you stopped participating in the illusions that kept everyone comfortable. That's when the distance crept in. Friends quietly stopped sharing things. Certain people got defensive around you for no obvious reason. Others started calling you different, intimidating, too serious. They couldn't explain why. They could just feel it. You were no longer emotionally available in the way they'd come to expect. And here's the part nobody warns empaths about ahead of time. The moment empathy stops making you softer and starts making you, in a strange way, dangerous. Because once an empath becomes calm, observant, and genuinely unreachable, they stop being useful to anyone who relies on emotional control. And that's exactly when the real isolation starts. The emotional shock absorber. For most of your life, you were the one who could feel everything, not just your own emotions, but the emotional weather of an entire room. You could walk in and instantly clock a tension nobody had mentioned out loud. You noticed shifts in tone, fleeting expressions, the quiet resentment hiding under a polite smile. While everyone else moved through life comfortably oblivious, you were absorbing all of it. And without ever deciding to, you became what a lot of people unconsciously needed: an emotional shock absorber. Someone angry, and you softened the room. Someone insecure, and you reassured them. Conflict appeared, and you adjusted yourself until the tension dissolved. At first, it felt like sensitivity. Then, slowly, it turned into a job description nobody had asked you to apply for: responsibility. Because once you can feel what other people feel, ignoring it becomes almost impossible. So you adapted. You became the listener, the mediator, the one who understood everyone. But there was a quiet cost building underneath that role the whole time. You rarely said what you actually felt. You filtered your words so nobody would feel threatened. You carried emotional weight that was never yours to begin with, and over time, something in you started to wear down. Not dramatically, silently. A slow exhaustion that didn't look like burnout from the outside, because you still smiled, still helped people, still played the role everyone had come to expect. But internally, the pressure kept accumulating, because being highly attuned to other people's emotions doesn't just create compassion. It creates an obligation you never signed up for. And eventually, the empath hits a threshold the moment absorbing everyone else's emotional chaos, stops feeling like kindness, and starts feeling like quiet self-erasure. This is where the transformation begins, because the empath's real upgrade doesn't happen when they learn to feel more. It happens when they finally stop absorbing everything around them. Most people don't grasp what that shift means until it's already underway. And the transformation doesn't start with strength. It starts with collapse. For years, you ignored the signals your mind kept sending. The subtle discomfort when someone's words didn't match their intentions, the quiet resentment that showed up every time you gave more than you got back. You noticed those things, but you overrode them, because being the empath meant understanding people, not confronting them. So when someone crossed a line, you talked yourself into a reason for it. They're stressed. They didn't mean it. You kept translating other people's behavior into excuses for your own patience. And the warning signs were always there: the passive aggression dressed up as a joke, the way certain people only surfaced when they needed something. But you looked past it, because acknowledging it would have meant changing the role you were playing. And by that point, that role had become part of your identity. The one who understands everyone. The one who quietly absorbs the damage so nobody else has to. The fracture. Eventually, something happens that breaks the illusion all at once. Not a small conflict, but a moment that exposes everything. A betrayal that, somehow, feels predictable the second it lands. Someone you defended. Someone you supported. When the moment finally came, they showed you exactly who they were. Cold, self-serving, indifferent to everything you'd felt on their behalf. What made it worse wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing you'd seen it coming. The signals had been there for months, sometimes years. Your intuition flagged it, but you overrode every instinct in the name of keeping the peace. That's where the real fracture happened, not between you and them, but between you and the version of yourself that kept ignoring its own knowledge. Because in that moment, an uncomfortable truth lands. The people around you didn't just hurt you. You helped build the conditions that allowed it. You tolerated what should have been confronted. You carried emotional weight. Other people were perfectly comfortable handing you. And once you see that clearly, the empath identity starts to crack, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally saw what caring without boundaries actually costs. Most empaths assume, at this stage, that all they need is stronger boundaries. What's actually forming underneath is something far more unsettling. What happened to you isn't random. It's a predictable psychological event. Carl Jung described this moment as the beginning of individuation, the stage where the identity you'd been performing for others starts collapsing under the weight of reality. For most of your life, you operated through what Jung called the persona, the social mask designed to maintain harmony, approval, and belonging. If you happened to be highly empathic, your persona likely became extremely refined. You learned to read emotional cues with precision, softened your reactions, filtered your truth so other people could stay comfortable. On the surface, this looked like kindness. Psychologically, it was adaptation. But the more energy poured into the persona, the more something else started forming underneath it. The shadow. In Jungian psychology, the shadow isn't evil. It's simply the parts of you forced into hiding to maintain acceptance. Your anger, your refusal, your instinct to confront dishonesty, your capacity to walk away from people who drain you. None of that ever disappeared. It was suppressed. And suppression always creates fragmentation, which is where suffering tends to begin. When one part of the psyche performs endless compassion, while another part quietly clocks manipulation, internal tension builds. Your conscious identity says, understand everyone. Your shadow says, stop tolerating them. For years, the persona stayed in control. But the betrayal you experienced triggered exactly what Jung kept describing: the return of the shadow. The psyche can only hold fragmentation for so long before it forces integration. And integration feels threatening because it dismantles the identity that used to keep you safe. When less becomes more, suddenly the empath starts experiencing unfamiliar impulses. Less explaining, less emotional rescue, more observation. You start noticing how often people leaned on your empathy to avoid accountability, and most disturbingly, how your own persona quietly enabled those dynamics to continue. This is the beginning of real individuation, not the peaceful version that shows up in self-help content, but the actual one, where the mask starts dissolving and the empath stops functioning as everyone else's free emotional infrastructure. This is the stage where the people around you start feeling uneasy, because once the persona weakens, the social balance you'd been quietly maintaining disappears. This is also the phase most people misread the worst. From the outside, it looks like you became colder, less expressive, less interested in propping up the dynamics you used to tolerate. But what actually changed wasn't your empathy, it was your relationship to it. For years, your empathy ran without any filter at all. You absorbed emotions automatically, responded to distress before anyone had to ask. Your awareness functioned like an open door, and almost anyone could walk through it, and most did, not always with bad intentions, just consistently, because environments naturally adjust to whoever stabilizes them. If you absorb the tension, others get to release it. That was the unspoken arrangement. You carried the emotional pressure of the room so everyone else could avoid looking at themselves. Eventually, your psyche hit a limit, not emotionally, structurally, because empathy without boundaries erodes identity. You slowly start being defined by what other people need from you, instead of what you actually are. The shift begins quietly, with observation. You start noticing patterns you used to ignore. Who only contacts you when something's wrong, who gets uncomfortable the moment you stop over explaining yourself. The dynamic becomes visible, and visibility changes behavior. You stop reacting instantly. You pause before responding. You let silence exist in spaces where you used to rush in to smooth things over. To everyone else, this feels unfamiliar. Your calm starts replacing your old emotional accessibility. And calm, in this context, turns out to be deeply destabilizing, because a lot of people unconsciously rely on your predictable emotional responses. They expect reassurance. They expect you to soften the consequences of their own behavior. But now you still see what they feel, you just no longer carry it for them. That distinction is what creates the perception of coldness, but coldness isn't what happened. Clarity happened. Your empathy became selective. Your nervous system stopped treating every emotional signal as an obligation to respond and started filtering instead. You observe more than you intervene. You let people experience the actual outcomes of their own behavior. This is the moment people start saying you've changed, sometimes carefully, sometimes with a quiet edge of accusation. What they actually mean is they can no longer access you the way they used to. You didn't become cruel. You became untouchable, not because you lost empathy, but because empathy is no longer the thing running your behavior. Awareness is, and awareness introduces a level of emotional control most people aren't comfortable being around, because once someone stops reacting predictably, the social scripts built around them start to collapse. People who used to manipulate small reactions out of you now run into silence instead. Your calm becomes a mirror, and mirrors make people uneasy, because when someone can't pull an emotion out of you on command, they're forced to face their own. Boundaries that don't sound like boundaries. The first transformation is subtle, but everyone feels it. You can still sense emotions with the same precision as before, tension in a voice, insecurity in a pause. Your perception didn't weaken. What changed is your reaction. For most of your life, perception automatically triggered responsibility. Someone was uncomfortable, you adjusted. That reflex slowly fades, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped translating every emotional signal into an obligation. You feel what people feel. You just don't carry it anymore. That shift creates friction, because their frustration lingers instead of dissolving into you. The old system breaks, because when the empath stops absorbing pressure, the pressure has to go somewhere, and people are forced to hold their own emotions. Most don't enjoy that. This is when people start saying, "You've changed," and honestly, they're not wrong. You stopped participating in emotional rescue. You still feel everything. You just refuse to be steered by it. And that's exactly when people lose whatever emotional leverage they had over you. The second transformation is where people get visibly uncomfortable, because boundaries from an empath look different than boundaries from anyone else. For years, you never needed to say no, you simply adapted yourself until conflict disappeared. But once your awareness sharpens, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You start noticing how often your patience got read as permission, how often your kindness quietly invited entitlement. The first change is simple. You stop explaining. You stop defending your limits. You just withdraw access, and that silence unsettles people far more than confrontation ever did, because when someone has grown used to endless understanding, plain clarity feels like hostility. People who relied on your patience suddenly accuse you of being harsh. The truth is simpler. You removed the emotional buffer that used to protect them from consequences, and when the buffer disappears, reality itself starts to feel aggressive. At this stage, you begin recognizing behavioral patterns almost instantly. Where your empathy used to focus on emotions, your awareness now focuses on structure. You notice who apologizes and repeats the exact same behavior, who gets defensive. The second accountability shows up, who reroutes conversations whenever the truth gets too close. Manipulation is rarely loud. It hides inside shifted tones, half jokes, selective honesty, and your awareness starts connecting those signals automatically. You don't need a smoking gun anymore. You just observe the sequence, behavior, reaction, repetition. And the disturbing part is how often that pattern reveals something uncomfortable. A lot of people aren't confused at all. They're strategic, testing how much emotional weight you'll keep agreeing to carry for them. When you recognize this clearly, your tolerance collapses not because you got cynical, but because the illusion of innocence is gone. And once you see the pattern, taking part in it starts to feel like betraying yourself. Relationships that were only ever held together by you. This is the stage where certain relationships quietly start dissolving, not through conflict, through absence. You stop feeding dynamics that were always running on your emotional labor. The conversations where someone vents endlessly but never changes. The friendships built entirely around your willingness to listen. You stop walking into those spaces, and the result is fascinating. Some relationships collapse almost immediately, because without your attention quietly stabilizing the interaction, the structure underneath becomes visible. The conversation dries up. The dependency reveals itself. People often read this as you pulling away out of hurt or anger. The truth is quieter. You simply stopped propping up a system that required you to disappear in order to function. Once your energy leaves, those systems can't sustain themselves, and the silence that follows reveals something many empaths struggle to accept. Some relationships only ever existed because you were the one holding them together. As the transformation deepens, another shift becomes noticeable. You talk less, not because you have nothing left to say, but because you no longer feel pressure to fill space. For most of your life, silence felt dangerous. It meant somebody might be uncomfortable, so you learned to stabilize moments with conversation. But now silence becomes neutral, even useful. You let pauses exist without rushing to repair them, and something strange happens. People start talking more around you, because silence creates pressure, and pressure makes people reveal things they normally keep hidden. They fill the quiet with details they never meant to share, not because you interrogated them, but because you stopped interrupting their own process. This is when people start calling you intimidating. What they're actually running into is the absence of emotional distraction, and when that distraction goes, reality gets harder to avoid. Selective empathy as self-respect. The final transformation is the most misunderstood of all. You don't lose empathy. You reclaim control over where it goes. For years, your empathy was universally available to strangers, to friends, to people who repeatedly drained you without giving anything back. Your nervous system responded automatically every time. Now it doesn't. You still feel people deeply, but awareness filters your response. You notice who shows real accountability, who respects your boundaries without negotiating them down, who gives back emotional honesty instead of just consuming yours. Those people get your empathy. Everyone else gets observation. That distinction quietly restructures your relationships, because once empathy becomes selective, emotional access has to be earned. A lot of people read this as distance, but what they're actually encountering is standards. Not everyone gets into your psychological space anymore. Not everyone gets the emotional generosity you used to give away for free. Once that boundary solidifies, your empathy didn't disappear. It got protected, and protection changes the way power moves around you. This shift doesn't stay inside your own head. It starts showing up in the exact places people expect to find the old version of you. The workplace is usually where the change shows up first. You stop volunteering for emotional labor nobody else wants. Stop smoothing over tension between coworkers. Stop pretending passive-aggressive behavior is just stress. Instead, you observe, answer directly, keep conversations short, and suddenly people who used to lean on your patience get uneasy, because the room now has to hold its own tension. The same shift appears in your family. For years, you were the emotional translator, calming arguments, carrying the invisible weight of keeping the peace. Then you stop explaining people to each other, stop fixing problems that were never yours. When someone crosses a line, you simply step back. Family members often react the hardest here, because systems built on overgiving don't adjust easily once the giver stops. The most dramatic version of this shift usually shows up in romantic relationships, where you start noticing patterns you once tolerated: the emotional testing, the quiet attempts to pull a reaction out of you. Instead of explaining yourself, you go calm, not passive-controlled. The moment you stop feeding the dynamic, the actual structure of the relationship becomes visible. Some partners meet you at this new level of honesty. Others slowly lose their grip on the connection entirely, because plenty of people only realize how much emotional control they had over you the moment that control disappears. What people call your coldness isn't emotional decay, it's psychological completion. The empath who reaches this stage hasn't lost feeling. They've stopped outsourcing their identity to everyone else's emotional demands. The nervous system isn't reacting automatically anymore. It's choosing. This is the stage Jung described as individuation. When the fragmented pieces of the psyche stop fighting each other, the persona stops performing endless understanding, and the shadow stops waiting underground, resentful and suppressed. Both finally integrate. You can feel deeply without surrendering authority over yourself. You can step away from people without producing a complete explanation of the decision. Your silence is enough on its own. And that's part of why people start experiencing you as unreachable, not because you closed off, but because your emotional center is no longer accessible through pressure, guilt, or expectation. Where people once found endless accommodation, they now find stillness. This is the empath's final form, not cruel, not detached from humanity, simply no longer controlled by it. You still feel the world fully. You just refuse to disappear inside it. This comes with a cost most people never mention out loud. Awareness doesn't only sharpen perception, it reduces compatibility. The moment you stop absorbing emotional chaos, certain relationships start quietly collapsing. People who used to feel comfortable around you start feeling watched, even when you haven't said a word, not because you're judging them, but because your presence no longer plays along with their illusions, and most social environments depend on those illusions to keep running. So distance grows. Friends who used to lean on your patience get defensive. Family members read your boundaries as coldness. Some people simply disappear once they realize they can't reach you the same way anymore. That's the quiet consequence of higher awareness. You start seeing through dynamics other people still depend on, and once you see them clearly, pretending becomes exhausting. This is part of why the empath's final transformation often looks like isolation from the outside, not because you rejected people, but because fewer and fewer people can stay comfortable around someone who no longer plays the role they were counting on. At first, it can feel like loss. The warmth you used to give freely, the openness that made people feel instantly safe around you, the willingness to bend your own boundaries just to keep a connection alive. From the outside, it might even look like something in you hardened, but that red misses what actually happened. You didn't lose your empathy, you reclaimed your center. For years, pieces of you were scattered across other people's expectations, your patience here, your understanding there, your silence wherever conflict appeared. You were fragmented, useful, well-liked, accepted, but fragmented. What Jung called individuation was never about becoming nicer, calmer, or more spiritual. It's the process of becoming whole. The persona that kept everyone comfortable loses its grip. The shadow that carried your suppressed truth stops hiding. And when those two finally come together, something stabilizes in you that isn't detachment, it's authority. You can feel the world without dissolving inside it. You can walk away without asking permission. You can exist without renegotiating your identity in every room you enter. This isn't emotional loss. It's psychological alignment. You didn't lose yourself. You stopped dividing yourself to survive. There's a particular kind of evening that comes much later in this process, once the dust has settled and the relationships that needed your old self to function have either changed shape or quietly ended. You'll be sitting somewhere ordinary, not performing anything for anyone, and you'll notice that the silence around you doesn't feel like a wound anymore. It just feels like room space you can finally move around in without checking who's watching, who needs you to be smaller, who's about to mistake your stillness for an invitation to take more. You'll probably still grieve the warmth you used to give away so easily, the version of you that made strangers feel instantly comfortable, the reflex that once made you indispensable to people who never quite earned that. That grief is allowed. It doesn't mean you're regressing. It just means you were good at something for a long time, even if that something was slowly costing you yourself. What replaces it isn't coldness. It's a kind of warmth with an actual door on it, one you get to open for the people who show up honestly, and keep closed for the ones who only ever wanted the room, not you. You haven't become someone who can't love deeply. You've become someone whose love finally requires the other person to actually be in the room with you, instead of just standing in the doorway, taking what they need, and calling it connection. That's not the end of your empathy. That's the first time it's ever really belonged to you. Now, I'd like to share a meaningful story with everyone. Campfire conversation. Listen up, Jack. The light's fading faster than a whore's energy on payday. Damned near as purple as the sheet, burns on her back too. You might as well enjoy that coffee, because I'm not carrying you when the best I can see is like a kitten in a sack. Why did I have to buy a talking horse? You've been whining all day. I don't like this. And are we there yet? It's getting to the point where my eardrums hurt the minute you think about opening your mouth. A body would think from your bleating that you were a sheep off to slaughter. Talk about sheep. Did I ever tell you how much you remind me of one? Coffee and chewing tobacco. Did you ever once think about brushing your teeth? Bean farts all over my saddle. Do you know why you have to eat all those beans? You smell so far upwind all the game know you're coming and run the other way, except the ones you kill with the stink. Try a bath sometime, cowboy. Hey, don't get on about my coffee and such. You keep going on about the sweet taste of clover, and how it reminds you of when you were a colt. New-cut hay dancing on my taste buds like fireflies on the August air. Where do you get this horsey poetry stuff? Seems to me it's just horse crap. I tried grass. That time you ate up my food from the saddlebag. Remember? Well, I thought it was more like dung beetles marching across my mouth. You'd best be careful too, Jack. Keep bad-mouthing me and I'll lay a hoof on you the way a cannonball whistles through a teepee. My feet are on fire the way that sky out there is. I've walked so much with you on my back today. Feels more like these shoes weigh 10 times what they do. And would you take this saddle off? There's a burr starting to act like it's one of those fancy pineapple things they have in town. Horse, just go to sleep, will you? Yeah, sure. Good night, cowboy. Good night, horse. Hey, cowboy. I love you. You too, horse. Dear viewers, that was our channel's discussion on the topic. The empath's darkest upgrade. Cold, calm, unreachable, Jung insight. If you found this video helpful or meaningful, please consider subscribing to support the channel. If you'd like me to create more content about emotions, relationships, or other psychological topics, feel free to leave a comment and let me know. I'll do my best to help you understand why you're feeling the way you do and what's really happening beneath the surface. For now, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you.